The night Eva Voss arrived at Ashford Manor, she was carrying three things: a letter of introduction signed by the Lord Chancellor himself, a quiet fury she had spent 20 years learning to hide, and absolutely no intention of making a scene. She made none. But by the time the evening was over, every person in that dining room would remember exactly where they had been standing when the Duke of Ashford handed his coat to the most powerful woman in the county, and she took it without a word. Some of them would later say she had been gracious. Others would say she had been patient. Only one person understood what she had actually been: dangerous. The carriages had been arriving since 7:30. Eva's was the last. Not by accident, her father's solicitor had suggested it quietly over tea that morning. "Arrive when the room is full, Miss Voss. Let them see you enter. Let them understand what the evening is." She had nodded, folded the letter into her reticule, and said nothing. She was very good at saying nothing. Ashford Manor stood at the top of a long gravel drive, lit from every window, the kind of house that had been built to remind people of their smallness. Eva had grown up hearing stories about it. Her father had called it a monument to borrowed pride. Her mother, before she died, had simply called it beautiful. Eva herself had no opinion yet. She preferred to form opinions slowly, after careful observation. She stepped out of the carriage alone. The footman at the door was young and nervous, and he did not offer his hand in time. Eva did not wait for it. She walked up the stone steps at a measured pace, her dark green dress quiet against the noise of the evening, her gloved hands still at her sides. Inside, the entrance hall was already crowded, silk and laughter and the smell of hothouse flowers and too much perfume. A string quartet played somewhere deeper in the house. No one turned to look at her. She was accustomed to that. She gave her name to the butler. He found it on his list, blinked once, just once, and said very correctly, "Of course, Miss Voss. His Grace will be informed of your arrival." She thanked him and stepped to the side to wait. That was when she saw him. The Duke of Ashford was standing perhaps 15 feet away, near the base of the grand staircase, and he was exactly as described: tall, dark-coated, with the kind of face that had clearly been handsome for so long that he had stopped noticing it. He was laughing at something the woman beside him had said. The woman was Lady Celeste Hale, and she was the kind of beautiful that filled a room before she entered it, gold-haired, sharp-smiled, her hand resting on the Duke's arm with the easy confidence of someone who had already decided how the evening would end. Eva observed this, filed it away, looked elsewhere. She did not see the Duke begin to turn. She did not see him glance toward the door, distracted, already reaching, the way a man reaches for something without looking, without thinking, because he expects a certain kind of person to be standing in a certain kind of place. She felt the weight before she understood it. Heavy wool, still cold from the night air, dropped across her gloved hands. Eva looked down. Then she looked up. The Duke of Ashford was already turning back to Lady Celeste, one hand raised to smooth his jacket, his attention fully returned to the woman beside him. He had not looked at Eva, not once. She was standing at the edge of the entrance hall in a dark green dress with his coat in her hands, and to him she was simply a fixture, a function, someone whose purpose was to hold things. Lady Celeste had seen it happen. Eva watched the smile move across Celeste's face, small, satisfied, gone in an instant, and understood immediately that this had not been an accident. Around them, 3 guests had noticed. 2 looked away. One elderly woman in gray silk met Eva's eyes with an expression that was equal parts horror and apology, and took a small step forward, then stopped. Nobody said a word. Eva looked down at the coat in her hands. She thought about the letter in her reticule. She thought about what her father's solicitor had said. She thought, briefly, about the precise and satisfying words she was entirely capable of saying in situations like this one, words that would have silenced the room and rearranged the evening completely. Then she folded the Duke's coat over her arm neatly, the way you fold something that belongs to someone else, and walked calmly toward the cloakroom. She was the guest of honor. She would let him figure that out himself. The dining room at Ashford Manor had been designed for exactly this kind of evening. Long table, high ceilings, candlelight that turned everything amber and forgiving. 16 place settings, each one arranged with the sort of precision that required a full day's preparation and a staff that knew better than to ask questions. Eva had seen grander rooms. She had also seen emptier ones. This one sat somewhere in between, impressive enough to intimidate, familiar enough to relax, which was, she suspected, entirely intentional. She found her place card without difficulty. It was at the Duke's right hand. She stood beside the chair for a moment, reading her own name in the careful copperplate script, and felt something settle in her chest, not pride, not quite, but something adjacent to it. Her father's solicitor had arranged this. The Lord Chancellor's office had confirmed it. The placement was not a courtesy. It was a statement. She pulled out the chair and sat down. She had been seated for perhaps 4 minutes when Lady Celeste arrived. Eva heard her before she saw her, that particular quality of entrance that Celeste seemed to carry with her everywhere. The way conversation dimmed and then brightened in her wake. The way men straightened almost without knowing they were doing it. She came around the far end of the table on the Duke's arm, laughing at something he had said, her gold hair catching every candle in the room. Then she saw the place card. The laugh did not stop. It simply adjusted, became something slightly different, slightly warmer, the way a skilled musician changes key mid-phrase without pausing for breath. "Oh," Celeste said lightly to no one in particular, "how funny. I was certain Hargrove seated me here." She touched the back of Eva's chair with 2 fingers, not pushing, not pulling, simply touching, the way one touches something to establish that it is there. "Didn't he say so, James?" The Duke glanced at the place cards with the mild distraction of a man who had never in his life been required to think very hard about seating arrangements. "I believe he said the right yes." He looked briefly at Eva, the same brief, unseeing look he had given her at the door, and said pleasantly, "I'm afraid there may have been some confusion with the cards." Eva said nothing. She was aware of the elderly woman in gray silk, seated 3 places down, watching, and of the young Lord Fenwick across the table, who had gone very still. She was aware of the particular quality of the silence that had settled over the nearest guests, the held-breath quality of people who knew something was wrong and had decided, collectively, that it was not their problem. She was aware of all of this. She picked up her place card, held it for one brief moment, and set it down again. Then she stood, smoothed her dress, and moved without a word to an empty chair further down the table, beside Lord Fenwick as it happened, who looked at her with an expression of such transparent discomfort that she almost felt sorry for him. "Miss," he began. "Fenwick," she said quietly, "tell me something interesting." He blinked. "I beg your pardon." "About anything." She unfolded her napkin across her lap. "I find that evenings like this one go considerably better when someone tells me something interesting early on." He stared at her for a moment. Then slowly, something in his expression shifted, uncertainty giving way to something that might eventually become respect. "I heard," he said, equally quietly, "that the East Wing has been closed for 11 years. Eva looked at him. "Why?" "No one knows." He paused, "or rather no one says." At the head of the table, the Duke settled into his chair. Lady Celeste sat at his right hand and touched his sleeve and said something that made him smile. The first course arrived. Conversation resumed its normal shape, like water closing over a stone. Eva lifted her soup spoon. Across the table, the elderly woman in gray silk, she had still not been introduced, Eva realized was watching her with an expression that had moved beyond apology into something more careful, more calculating. The woman's eyes moved from Eva to the Duke and back again, and her mouth pressed into a thin, considering line. Eva met her gaze, held it. The woman gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. Eva returned it. She did not know yet who the woman was. She did not know that by the end of the evening, that small exchange across a dinner table would matter more than anything else that had happened tonight, more than the coat, more than the chair, more than Celeste's careful, practiced smile. She only knew that somewhere in this house, a butler had her name on a list, and that the Duke of Ashford had not yet read it. The dessert course arrived at 9:30. Eva had eaten methodically, spoken pleasantly with Lord Fenwick, who had turned out to be genuinely interesting once he stopped being frightened, and had not looked at the head of the table more than twice. Both times, the Duke had been looking at Celeste. Both times, Celeste had been looking back with the focused attention of a woman who understood exactly what she was doing. Eva had looked away both times, quickly, cleanly. She was finishing her second glass of wine when it happened. It came from the far end of the table, an older gentleman she did not recognize, heavy-set, with the red-cheeked look of a man who had been drinking since before he arrived. He had been talking loudly for the better part of an hour, the way men like him always talked at dinners like this one, filling space with noise and expecting the room to be grateful. Eva had been successfully ignoring him. Then his voice rose above the rest. "Voss," he said, pointing a thick finger down the length of the table with no particular concern for manners. "Eva Voss, I knew your father, tremendous man, tremendous." He paused, apparently satisfied with this. Then louder, "You're the one who bought the Whitmore Holdings last spring, aren't you? The entire northern portfolio." The table did not go quiet all at once. It went quiet the way a fire goes out. One corner first, then the next, until there was nothing left but silence and the faint sound of the string quartet playing something no one was listening to anymore. Eva set down her wine glass. "I am," she said. "Thought so." The old gentleman nodded vigorously. "Damned impressive. My solicitor said it was the largest private land acquisition in 3 counties in 40 years. Said whoever pulled it off either had nerves of iron or didn't understand what they were doing." He squinted at her. "You understood, didn't you? It was not a question." "Yes," Eva said, "I understood." Silence. Not the polite, conversational kind. The other kind, the kind that meant something had shifted in the room and everyone was waiting to find out in which direction. Eva did not look at the head of the table. She did not need to. She could feel it, the exact moment the Duke of Ashford stopped looking at Lady Celeste and looked, for the first time that evening, at the woman sitting in the wrong chair. She could feel it the way you feel a change in weather before the clouds arrive, a pressure difference, a stillness, something in the air that had not been there a moment ago. Lord Fenwick, beside her, had gone very still. The elderly woman in grey silk had set down her spoon. "Madame Voss." The voice came from the Duke's end of the table, not the Duke himself, but his estate manager, Hargrove, who had appeared in the doorway with the expression of a man who had been waiting for exactly this moment and dreading it equally. He addressed Eva with a correctness that was almost aggressive in its precision. "I wonder if I might have a brief word after dinner regarding the Eastern parcels, at your earliest convenience." "Of course," Eva said, "Eastern parcels." She heard it move around the table, not the words themselves, but the understanding behind them, rippling outward from guest to guest like something dropped into still water. The Eastern parcels. The Ashford Eastern parcels, which had been mortgaged quietly 3 years ago and then mortgaged again, and which now, if the old gentleman's arithmetic was even approximately correct, sat inside the Whitmore Holdings that Eva Voss had purchased last spring. Eva Voss, who was sitting in the wrong chair, who had arrived alone, who was holding the Duke's coat in the entrance hall 40 minutes ago. She heard the moment he understood it. Not a sound, a silence. A very specific kind of silence, the kind that a man makes when something rearranges itself inside him very rapidly, and he is too well bred to show it on his face. Eva picked up her wine glass, took a small, unhurried sip. Across the table, the elderly woman in grey silk had both hands folded in her lap and was watching the Duke with an expression Eva could not fully read from this distance. Not surprise. Something older than surprise. Something that looked almost like recognition, as though she had been waiting for this particular evening for a very long time. Then the woman looked at Eva, and this time her expression was entirely different. This time, she smiled. It was a small smile, private, the kind of smile that meant I know something you don't know yet, and I am very much looking forward to watching you find out. Eva filed this away, added it to the coat, added it to the chair, added it to the Eastern parcels and the mortgage documents and the letter in her reticule and the solicitor's careful voice that morning over tea. Let them see you enter, Miss Voss. Let them understand what the evening is. She understood what the evening was. The question now was whether the Duke of Ashford did. She did not look at him, not yet. She set down her wine glass, turned back to Lord Fenwick and said, "You were telling me about the East Wing." Fenwick blinked, swallowed. Was I? "You were about to," Eva said pleasantly. "Please continue." The gentlemen took their port in the East sitting room. The ladies withdrew to the blue drawing room, which was decorated in the particular shade of cold, expensive blue that Eva associated with houses that had run out of warmth long before they ran out of money. There were 8 of them, 7, if you didn't count the elderly woman in gray silk, who had disappeared somewhere between the dining room and the stairs and had not yet reappeared. Eva counted her absence, filed it away. She took a chair near the window, slightly apart from the main cluster of sofas, and accepted a cup of tea she did not intend to drink. Around her, conversation resumed its normal evening shape: marriages, estates, the weather in Bath, someone's daughter who had made a very surprising match in October. Eva listened without appearing to listen, which was a skill she had developed early and practiced often. She was on her 3rd minute of this when Celeste sat down beside her. Not across from her, beside her, close enough that their skirts touched, close enough that whatever was said would not carry. "You're very quiet," Celeste said. "I'm a quiet person," Eva said. Celeste smiled. It was a beautiful smile, genuinely beautiful, Eva thought, not performed. That was the thing about Celeste that Eva had understood within the first 10 minutes of watching her across a dinner table. She was not stupid. She was not simply decorative. She was careful and she was patient, and she had very good instincts about people, which made her considerably more interesting than Eva had initially expected, and considerably more dangerous. "James feels terrible," Celeste said, "about the confusion this evening." Eva looked at her. "Does he?" "He's very conscientious underneath it all. People don't always see that." Celeste tilted her head slightly, the way a person does when they are arranging their expression into something sympathetic. "I hope you won't judge him too harshly based on one evening. First impressions can be so misleading." Eva said nothing. Celeste continued, unhurried. "I only say so because, well, you seem like a reasonable woman, Miss Voss, and I think reasonable women understand that men like James sometimes need guidance in social situations. He relies on the people closest to him rather more than he realizes." A small pause. "I've been trying to help him with that." "How thoughtful," Eva said. "It is rather." Celeste's smile did not waver. "I've been helping him with quite a few things, actually, over the past year or so. He came back from the season with such a distorted picture of certain people. I imagine that happens when one hears things second-hand, rumors, impressions." She smoothed a non-existent wrinkle from her skirt. "I've done my best to give him a clearer picture." Eva looked at her tea. There it was. Not an admission, nothing so clumsy. Just the outline of one, visible only if you were paying close attention. The shape of a thing held up to the light for one brief moment and then put away again. Rumors, impressions, a clearer picture. Eva thought about the Duke's face at the door, the absolute, uncomplicated blankness of it. The way he had handed her his coat without a flicker of doubt. A man did not look through a woman like that on his own, not a woman who had been formally invited to his table, not without help. Someone had constructed that blindness carefully, brick by brick, over months. A country girl, a country nobody. Plain, unremarkable, not worth a second look. She thought about how long it would have taken, the patience required. The small, consistent, perfectly calibrated words dropped into conversation at exactly the right moments. Not lies, nothing so easily disproven, just shadings, adjustments, the steady, gentle pressure of a hand on a rudder. Celeste was watching her with an expression of mild, pleasant concern. Eva picked up her tea, took a sip, set it down again. "Tell me," she said conversationally, "how long have you known Lord Ashby?" Something moved across Celeste's face. Very fast, very small, gone before it fully arrived. "I'm not sure Viscount Ashby," Eva said. "From Derbyshire. I believe you were introduced at the Pemberton Musicale in February." She paused. "Or perhaps it was January. My memory for dates is imprecise." It was not imprecise. Celeste was quiet for exactly 3 seconds. Eva counted them. "I know a great many people," Celeste said finally. Her voice had not changed. Her smile had not changed. Only something behind her eyes had shifted, very slightly, like furniture moved an inch to the left in a familiar room, wrong enough to notice, not wrong enough to name. "Of course," Eva said, "as do I." She set down her cup and stood, smoothing her skirts with the unhurried ease of someone who had nowhere particular to be and no reason to rush. "Thank you for the conversation, Lady Celeste," she said. It was very clarifying. She moved away toward the window before Celeste could answer. Outside, the grounds of Ashford Manor lay dark and still under a half-moon, the long drive winding away through the trees toward the road. Eva stood with her hands folded and looked at it for a long moment. Viscount Ashby. Celeste did not know that Eva had been present at a dinner in London 6 weeks ago where Ashby had said, to 3 witnesses and a moderately attentive footman, that he intended to acquire the Ashford Northern pastures before the end of the year. He had seemed very confident. He had seemed, in fact, like a man who had already been told the acquisition was arranged. Eva had wondered at the time how he could be so certain. She thought she was beginning to understand. Behind her she heard the soft, resumed murmur of conversation. Heard Celeste's laugh, light, social, perfectly calibrated as she rejoined the other women. Eva looked at the dark drive. She thought about the coat, the chair, the Eastern parcels, Celeste's hand on the Duke's arm and the smile that had crossed her face in the entrance hall, small, satisfied, gone in an instant. She thought about a man who had been guided, carefully and patiently, into blindness. And she thought, not for the first time that evening, but for the first time with something that felt almost like decision, that she was going to have to do something about this. Not for herself. She had the Whitmore holdings. She had the Eastern parcels. She had the Lord Chancellor's letter and a solicitor who knew exactly what he was doing, and a father who had spent 20 years teaching her precisely how to walk into a room full of people who underestimated her. She did not need the Duke of Ashford for anything, but the elderly woman in gray silk had smiled at her across the dinner table. And Eva Voss had never been very good at walking away from a problem once she understood its shape. She had decided to leave before breakfast. Not dramatically, no packed trunks in the hallway, no pointed farewells. Simply a quiet word to Hargrove in the morning, a carriage ordered for 9 o'clock and gone. Clean, uncomplicated. The kind of exit that left no material for gossip because there was nothing to describe. Miss Voss. Oh, she left early. Prior engagement, I believe. Eva was good at those exits. She had practiced them. She was in the East Corridor, returning to her room from the library. She had slipped away from the drawing room at 10, helped herself to a candle and 2 hours of undisturbed reading, and felt considerably better for it when the door opened. Not a guest room door. The door at the far end of the corridor, the one that led to what Fenwick had told her over dinner was the private sitting room, the one kept specifically for the Duke's mother, who had, until this moment, not appeared at any point in the evening. The woman who stepped into the corridor was small and white-haired, and moved with the deliberate, unhurried precision of someone who had learned a long time ago that speed was unnecessary when you already knew where everything was going. She was wearing a dark blue dressing gown and carrying a single candle, and she did not look remotely surprised to find Eva standing in her corridor at midnight. Eva recognized her immediately. Gray silk, The woman from the dining room. "Miss Voss," the Duchess said, not a question. "Your Grace," Eva said. The Duchess looked at her for a long moment, the same careful, measuring look from across the dinner table, except closer now, unhurried, thorough. Eva stood still and let herself be looked at. She had been looked at by formidable women before. She had learned not to fill the silence. "You're leaving in the morning," the Duchess said. "I had intended to, yes." The Duchess moved past her, unhurried, to the small bench beneath the corridor window and sat down with the ease of someone sitting in their own kitchen. She set her candle on the sill. Then she looked at Eva and said simply, "Sit down." Eva sat. For a moment neither of them spoke. Outside the window, the grounds lay quiet under the half-moon, the same view Eva had been staring at an hour ago from the drawing room, except from a different angle, which made it look almost like a different place entirely. "I was not well enough to come down to dinner," the Duchess said. "I watched from the gallery." Eva absorbed this. The gallery above the dining room, of course. She had not looked up. She rarely looked up. She filed this away as a useful reminder. "The coat," the Duchess said. "Tell me what you thought." Eva considered the question carefully. Not what she felt, the Duchess had not asked that. "I thought," she said, "that it had been arranged." It had. The Duchess's voice was flat and precise. "Not by my son. He is many things. He is not cruel." "I know," Eva said. The Duchess looked at her sharply. "You know." "A cruel man enjoys the moment," Eva said. "He looked for your reaction. He looked for Lady Celeste's. He did not look for mine." She paused. "He didn't know I was there. That's not cruelty. That's management." Something shifted in the Duchess's expression. Not surprise exactly. More like the satisfaction of a measurement confirmed. "Has been managing him for 11 months, the Duchess said. "Since October of last year. Small things at first, social things. Who to invite, who to overlook, which letters needed his attention and which ones didn't." She looked at her candle. "I noticed in February. By March I was certain. By April I understood what she was building toward, and I could not." She stopped, pressed her lips together. "He does not believe me. He thinks I am protective. Unreasonably so." Eva said nothing. "I have been trying to find someone he would listen to," the Duchess said. "Someone outside this house, outside this county, without obvious interest in the outcome. Someone with enough standing that he could not simply dismiss what they told him." She paused. "Someone who would still be here long enough to tell him." Eva looked at the dark window. "I see," she said. "You are the largest private landholder in 3 counties, the Duchess said. "You have the Lord Chancellor's letter in your reticule. You have the eastern parcels. You sat in the wrong chair for 40 minutes without saying a single word, and when you finally spoke it was to ask Fenwick about the East Wing." A pause. "Why the East Wing?" Eva glanced at her. "Because Fenwick was frightened and needed something to do with his hands, and because everyone in that room was watching me. If I had looked angry, they would have talked about my anger. If I had looked hurt, they would have talked about my hurt. If I asked Fenwick about the East Wing." "They talked about the East Wing," the Duchess said. "They talked about the East Wing," Eva confirmed. Silence. Outside, somewhere in the grounds, an owl called once and went quiet. "Stay," the Duchess said. 3 days, that is all I am asking. 3 days and I will not ask anything else of you." Eva looked at her hands in her lap, her gloved hands, still in her gloves at half past midnight because she had not yet been to her room. She thought about the carriage ordered for 9 o'clock. She thought about her solicitor's voice and her father's face, and the particular exhaustion of walking into rooms full of people who had already decided what she was. She thought about Celeste's smile in the entrance hall. Small and satisfied and gone in an instant. 3 days, Eva said. 3 days, the Duchess said. Eva stood, smoothed her skirts, picked up her candle. "I'll cancel the carriage," she said. She walked back down the corridor toward her room. Behind her she heard the Duchess stand, heard the soft sound of the sitting room door, heard nothing after that. The corridor was very quiet. The candle threw a small circle of light around her feet, and beyond it the house was entirely dark, the kind of dark that very old houses make thick, settled, full of things that had been left in it for a long time. Eva reached her door. She thought briefly about the east wing, closed for 11 years. She put her hand on the door handle. Nobody says Fennec had told her, or rather nobody says. Eva filed this away. She went to bed. The first morning passed quietly. Eva came down to breakfast at 8, which was early enough to avoid most of the guests and late enough to avoid appearing eager. The dining room held only Fennec, who was eating toast with the focused concentration of a man nursing a headache, and a young baronet whose name she had not caught the previous evening and who left within 10 minutes of her arrival. She ate, she read. She said good morning to Hargrove when he came in with the post and watched him sort it with the practiced efficiency of a man who had been doing this for 30 years and had strong opinions about the correct order. The Duke did not come down to breakfast. Celeste did, at 9:30, in a pale yellow morning dress that managed to look both casual and deliberate. She saw Eva, smiled with genuine pleasantness, and sat at the opposite end of the table. They did not speak. Eva returned to her book. Celeste poured her tea and looked out the window with the serene expression of a woman who had spent the night sleeping very well. Eva turned a page she had not read. The first crack appeared that afternoon. She was in the library properly this time, with permission, having asked Hargrove that morning whether it would be convenient when the Duke came in. He did not see her immediately. The library at Ashford Manor was a serious room, tall and dark-shelved and smelling of leather and old paper, with deep armchairs set back from the windows, in the kind of deliberate shadow that suggested the previous Duke had done his reading in a state of aggressive privacy. Eva had found the armchair in the far corner within 10 minutes of arriving, and had been sitting in it for the better part of 2 hours. The Duke went straight to the desk. He was carrying a folded document and wearing the expression of a man with somewhere to be, distracted, purposeful, already thinking about the next thing. He opened the top drawer, put the document in, closed it. Then he turned to leave. He stopped. He had seen her. Eva looked up from her book with the mild, unhurried expression of someone who had been sitting in the same chair for 2 hours and had no particular opinion about being interrupted. "Miss Voss," he said. "Your Grace," she said. He stood very still for a moment, not frozen, not uncomfortable, just still, in the way of a man recalibrating. His eyes moved briefly to the book in her hands, to the small table beside her where she had set her tea, to the stack of 3 additional volumes she had pulled from the shelves and not yet decided about. "Hargrove said you were using the library," he said. He was kind enough to offer it. "Of course," a pause. "I hope that is, you have everything you need." "I do, thank you." Another pause, longer this time. Eva returned her eyes to her book, not pointedly, simply. The way you returned to something you were doing before you were interrupted. She heard him take a breath. "Miss Voss." His voice had changed slightly, the purposeful quality gone, replaced with something more careful. "I owe you an apology." Eva looked up. He was standing in the middle of the library with his hands at his sides and his jaw set at the angle of a man who had prepared a speech and was now finding it inadequate. He looked, she thought, considerably less certain than he had looked in the entrance hall the previous evening. Less assembled. She found, to her mild surprise, that she did not enjoy this as much as she had expected to. "The evening did not," he began. The door opened. Celeste came in on a breath of yellow dress and light perfume, holding 2 letters and wearing an expression of pleasant urgency. "James, Hargrove needs you in the study, something about the northern boundary, oh." She stopped, looked at Eva, smiled. "Miss Voss, how lovely, are you finding everything you need?" "Perfectly, thank you," Eva said. Celeste touched the Duke's sleeve. "It won't take long, I think." Hargrove seemed anxious. She glanced at the letters in her hand with a small frown as though she had just noticed something. "Actually, James, this one is addressed to you, but it came in with my correspondence. I nearly missed it entirely. You should look at it before the meeting." She held it out. The Duke took it, looked at it briefly, then at Eva, then back at the letter. "We'll continue this," he said to Eva. "Of course," Eva said. They left. The door closed. Eva sat for a moment looking at the middle distance. Then she looked at the closed door. The letter had been at the bottom of Celeste's small stack, half tucked beneath the other envelopes. Eva had very good eyes and a long-standing habit of reading things upside down from across rooms, a skill her governess had deplored and her father had quietly encouraged. The handwriting on the envelope had not been Hargrove's. It had not been the estate office's standard copperplate. It had been small, cramped, hurried, the handwriting of someone who did not write formal correspondence very often. She had not recognized the hand, but she had recognized the seal. Small, dark red, a specific device that she had seen once before, pressed into the wax of a different letter, on a different occasion in a different county. Viscount Ashby's seal. Eva closed her book. She sat with this for a long moment, the letter, the timing, the neat efficiency of Celeste's entrance, the way the apology had been interrupted before it could finish becoming one. Then she stood, reshelved the 3 books she had not read, and went to find the Duchess. The second crack appeared at dinner. It was smaller, faster, the kind of thing you could miss if you were not paying attention. They were 7 at table that evening, several guests having departed after breakfast, and the conversation had settled into the comfortable, meandering quality of a group that had survived one formal dinner together and felt entitled to relax. Fenwick was telling a story about a horse. The young baronet was listening with polite incomprehension. Celeste was at the Duke's right hand again, and Eva was beside Fenwick, and the Duchess, who had come down to dinner for the first time, causing a brief, carefully suppressed ripple of surprise among the remaining guests, was at the foot of the table. Eva was listening to Fenwick and simultaneously watching, from the corner of her eye, the Duke's face. He was listening to Celeste. He was always listening to Celeste. That was the thing, the quality of his attention when she spoke, focused and warm and slightly unguarded in a way that suggested he had stopped being careful around her some time ago. Eva watched it with the detached interest of someone studying a mechanism. Then Celeste said something. Eva caught only the end of it, something about the Whitmore holdings, something light and passing, said with a small laugh, and the Duke smiled. It was a specific smile, the kind of smile that means "I've heard this before." Eva set down her fork. She looked at her plate. The Whitmore holdings, her holdings, and a smile that meant it was not the first time the subject had come up at this table in this room with this woman providing the commentary. She picked her fork back up. Across the table, the Duchess was looking at her. Eva met her eyes for exactly 1 second. The Duchess looked away. Fenwick finished his story about the horse. The baronet laughed uncertainly. Celeste touched the Duke's arm and said something else, lower this time, and the Duke nodded with the comfortable ease of a man receiving information he trusts from a source he has never thought to question. Eva ate her dinner. She thought about the letter, the seal, the smile. She thought about 11 months of very careful, very patient work. She thought about the East Wing, closed for 11 years, and the specific way Fenwick had said nobody says, not nobody knows, but nobody says. And she thought that she was beginning to understand that there were several things in this house that nobody said, and that at least some of them were connected. She looked at the Duke's profile in the candlelight, the set of his jaw, the quality of his attention, the particular blindness of a man who had been guided into a corner so gradually he had mistaken it for a room. She thought, 3 days, today was the first. The second morning began with fog. It came in from the valley sometime before dawn and settled over the grounds of Ashford Manor with the quiet, proprietary confidence of weather that intended to stay. By the time Eva came down to breakfast, the gardens had disappeared entirely. The gravel drive had become a gray suggestion, and the trees at the edge of the park were only shapes, present but uncertain, the way things look when the light refuses to commit. Eva stood at the breakfast room window for a long moment and looked at it. Then she poured her tea and sat down and thought about the seal. She had told the Duchess about it the previous afternoon briefly, precisely, without elaboration. The Duchess had listened with her hands folded in her lap and her eyes on the middle distance, and when Eva finished she had said nothing for long enough that Eva began to wonder if she had heard. Then she said, "Ashby has been trying to acquire the northern pastures for 2 years. James refused him twice. He stopped asking after last October, when Celeste arrived." Eva had turned this over in her mind for the remainder of the afternoon and through most of dinner, and for a considerable portion of the previous night, examining it from different angles the way you examine a piece of furniture you suspect has a hidden drawer, pressing here, testing there, looking for the place where the surface gives. The shape of it was clear enough. Celeste close to the Duke, managing his correspondence, controlling his impressions, steering him away from alliances that did not serve her purpose. Ashby waiting. The northern pastures sitting there, patient as land always is, while above them 2 people arranged the conditions of their transfer without the owner's knowledge. What Eva did not yet have was proof. Not the kind that could be shown. Not the kind that a man who trusted someone completely would accept from a woman he had handed his coat to in a hallway. She needed something specific, something that could not be reframed, could not be softened, could not be absorbed into one of Celeste's careful, smiling explanations and returned to him in a different shape. She drank her tea. She thought. It was Hargrove who found her at 10:30 in the corridor outside the estate office. He came around the corner carrying a ledger and stopped when he saw her with the expression of a man who has been wanting to say something for some time and has not yet decided whether to say it. Eva looked at him steadily. Hargrove had been at Ashford Manor for 31 years. Eva knew this because she had asked Fenwick, who knew everything about everyone in the house with the helpless, compulsive thoroughness of a man who simply could not stop paying attention. 31 years, which meant he had served the previous Duke and the one before that, which meant that whatever happened in this house, Hargrove had almost certainly watched it happen, filed it carefully, and said nothing to anyone. "Miss Voss," he said. "Mr. Hargrove," she said. He looked at the ledger in his hands, then at the corridor, then at her. "The eastern parcels," he said carefully, "are not the only matter outstanding between this estate and the Whitmore holdings." Eva waited. "There is a question," Hargrove said, "regarding the drainage easements along the southern boundary, a question that has been pending for some months. His Grace has been meaning to address it." He paused. "He has been meaning to address it since February. Each time the correspondence was prepared, it was delayed." Eva looked at him. "Delayed," she said. "Yes." Hargrove's voice was entirely neutral, entirely correct, entirely the voice of a man who was not saying anything except exactly what he was saying. "I prepared the initial letter myself in February, and again in March, and again in April." A pause. "Each time I was informed that His Grace had decided to wait." "Were you informed by His Grace?" Hargrove looked at the ledger. "The instructions," he said precisely, "came through Lady Celeste, who conveyed that His Grace preferred to address the matter in person at a more convenient time." Eva said nothing. "I thought," Hargrove said, "that as you are here and as the matter is outstanding, it might be convenient to discuss it directly, with you, this morning." He looked up at her. "If you were available." "I am available," Eva said. "Good," Hargrove said, and then very quietly in a voice that had not changed in tone or expression at all, "The estate office has a second door, Miss Voss. It opens onto the east corridor. It is a quiet room. Conversations there are generally private." Eva looked at him for a long moment. "Thank you, Mr. Hargrove," she said. "Of course, Miss Voss," he said, and opened the estate office door. They spent 40 minutes on the drainage easements, which were genuine and required attention, and which Eva addressed with the focused efficiency of someone who had not come to the country to spend her time on drainage easements but was perfectly capable of doing so. Hargrove was precise and thorough and did not waste words, which Eva appreciated. At the end of 40 minutes, as she was gathering her notes, Hargrove said, "There is one additional matter." Eva looked up. He set the ledger on the desk and opened it to a page near the back. Not the main accounts, she saw, but a supplementary record, the kind kept for internal correspondence, outgoing and incoming letters logged by date and sender. February the 4th, he said, not pointing, simply reading. A letter received from Viscount Ashby, addressed to His Grace, logged as received. He turned the page. February the 4th, same date. A letter sent from this estate to Viscount Ashby, not in His Grace's hand, not signed by His Grace. He paused. Signed Miss Voss by Lady Celeste Hale, acting on behalf of the estate. Eva was very still. "The content," she said. "I do not have the content," Hargrove said. "I have only the log." He closed the ledger. "But I have the log for February, March, April, May, June, July, August, September, October, November, and December of last year, and for January and February of this year, and the correspondence between this estate and Viscount Ashby's office during that period is," he paused, choosing the word with care, "considerable." "Does the Duke know this correspondence exists?" "His Grace," Hargrove said, "believes that Viscount Ashby stopped writing after his second refusal." Silence. The fog pressed against the estate office window. Somewhere in the house a clock struck 11. "Mr. Hargrove," Eva said, "how long have you been keeping this log?" "Since February," he said, "of last year." "And you have said nothing?" "I had nothing," he said. "That could not be explained away. Letters can be intercepted in error. Signatures can be misread. A careful person," he paused again, "a very careful person can always find an explanation for individual facts. What cannot be explained away is the pattern." He looked at her. "I have the pattern, Miss Voss. I have been waiting for someone to give it to." Eva looked at the closed ledger. She thought about 11 months. She thought about Hargrove, 31 years in this house, preparing the same letter in February and March and April, logging each interception with the quiet, methodical patience of a man building a case one page at a time. She thought about the Duchess watching from the gallery. She thought about Fenwick saying nobody says. She thought about all the people in this house who had been watching and waiting and holding their individual pieces of a thing they could not assemble alone. "May I borrow the ledger?" she asked. "I had assumed you would," Hargrove said, and slid it across the desk. She found the Duchess in her sitting room at noon. She laid the ledger on the table between them without preamble, opened to the relevant pages and said, "It's enough. It's more than enough. The question is how." The Duchess looked at the pages for a long time. Then she said, "He will not believe it from me. I have tried 3 times. Each time she stopped, pressed her lips together. She is very good at what she does." "I know," Eva said. "He will want to believe her. He has invested a great deal in believing her." The Duchess looked up. "That is not weakness. That is the particular difficulty of trusting someone. When you have let someone close enough, the evidence against them does not feel like evidence. It feels like an attack." Eva said nothing. "He will need to see it himself," the Duchess said. "Not be told, not be shown a ledger, see it. Something he cannot explain away because he watched it happen with his own eyes." Eva looked at the window. The fog was beginning to lift. Slowly, at the edges first, the way fog always lifted. Not all at once, but in pieces. The shapes of things becoming gradually less uncertain. The trees at the edge of the park resolving themselves back into trees. "She doesn't know about the ledger," Eva said. "No. She doesn't know what Hargrove has been doing." "No. She thinks," Eva said slowly, "that she has managed this, all of it. That everything is still arranged the way she arranged it." She paused. which means she will keep arranging. The Duchess was quiet. If she believes she is about to lose something, Eva said, she will act quickly, and if the Duke is watching, she will show him herself, the Duchess said softly. Yes, another silence. What are you proposing? The Duchess asked. Eva looked at the ledger. At the careful, patient rows of dates and names that Hargrove had been building for 11 months in a quiet room that conversations in were generally private. I am going to tell her, Eva said, that I am leaving tomorrow. The Duchess looked at her sharply. She has been managing the situation, Eva said. She believes she is in control of it. If she thinks I am leaving, if she thinks the threat is removing itself, she will relax. And if she relaxes, she becomes careless, the Duchess said. Everyone does, Eva said, when they think they've won. She closed the ledger. Outside, the last of the fog was dissolving. The grounds of Ashford Manor lay gray and damp and very still, and the drive was visible again all the way to the road, and the trees were entirely themselves once more, solid, certain, exactly where they had always been. Tonight, the Duchess said. Tonight, Eva said. She found Celeste in the blue drawing room at 2:30. She did not sit down. She stood near the door with her gloves in her hand and her expression pleasant and said, I wanted to let you know, Lady Celeste, that I'll be leaving tomorrow morning. Early. I don't want to disrupt the household. Celeste looked up from her embroidery. Something passed through her eyes very fast, very small. The same thing Eva had seen at dinner. The furniture moved an inch, the wrongness that was almost imperceptible. Then she smiled. How disappointing, she said warmly. We've so enjoyed having you. You're very kind, Eva said. I'll let James know, Celeste said. I'm sure he'll want to say goodbye properly, after, well, a small pause, a perfectly calibrated note of sympathy. After the confusion of the first evening, I know he's been wanting to make things right. There's no need, Eva said pleasantly. Please don't trouble him, she left. She walked back down the corridor to her room and sat on the edge of the bed and looked at the wall for a moment. Then she thought, tonight, it happened at dinner. Not dramatically, not loudly, in the way that true things often happen quietly in a corner of a moment that everyone was watching anyway. They were 9 at table. The fog had brought several guests indoors earlier than planned, and the dining room felt fuller and warmer than the previous evening, conversation running easily across the table, wine poured generously. Celeste was at the Duke's right hand. Eva was beside Fenwick. The Duchess was at the foot of the table. Eva was not watching Celeste. This was deliberate. She had positioned herself in conversation with Fenwick and the young baronet, animated enough to be convincing, consistent enough to be forgettable, and she had not looked at Celeste directly in 40 minutes, which meant Celeste had stopped watching her. The letter arrived with the second course. A footman brought it on a small tray addressed to the Duke, marked urgent, the kind of thing that would normally have been held until after dinner. Hargrove was not in the room. The footman, Eva noted, was one of the younger ones, recently hired, not yet fully absorbed into the particular ecosystem of a long-established house. Celeste saw it first. Eva was not looking, but she heard the small, almost inaudible change in the quality of the conversation at the head of the table, a fractional pause, a reorientation, the way sound changes when someone's attention moves. I'll take that, Celeste said to the footman, pleasantly, naturally, the way someone speaks when they have said the same thing many times before and it has always worked. It's addressed to His Grace, my lady, the footman said. Yes, I know, I'll see that he gets it after dinner. He doesn't like to be interrupted at table. The footman hesitated. This was the crack. Not a dramatic crack, not a loud one. Just the hesitation of a young footman who had, apparently, been given different instructions by someone else that morning and was not quite sure what to do about it. "I was told," the footman said carefully, "to deliver it directly to His Grace, my lady. Those were my instructions." Celeste's hand, which had been extended toward the tray, did not move. 2 seconds. 3. Eva was looking at Fennec and hearing every word. "James," Celeste said, and her voice had changed almost imperceptibly, but changed, the warmth thinning slightly at the edges. "This is unnecessary. Tell him to leave it with me." The Duke had been listening. Eva could hear it in the quality of the silence, the particular attention of a man who had just noticed that a thing was happening that he did not understand. "Give it here," the Duke said, not to Celeste, to the footman. Another silence. The letter changed hands. The footman withdrew. The table had gone quiet in that particular way, the fire going out way, corner by corner. Eva watched Fennec's face. He was looking at his plate with the focused attention of a man who was absolutely listening to everything happening at the other end of the table. She heard the envelope open. She heard nothing for a long moment. Then the Duke said, very quietly, in a voice Eva had not heard from him before, not the pleasant distraction of the entrance hall, not the careful apology of the library, but something older and flatter and considerably more dangerous. "Hargrove." Hargrove appeared in the doorway as though he had been standing just outside it, which Eva suspected he had. "Your Grace." "The estate office," the Duke said, "after dinner." "Of course, Your Grace." Hargrove withdrew. Celeste said something low, quick, the tone of someone redirecting. Eva heard the Duke respond in monosyllables, heard Celeste try again, heard the silence that followed. Eva picked up her wine glass. Beside her, Fennec exhaled very slowly. "Miss Voss," he said quietly, not looking at her. "Fennec," she said, equally quietly. "Did you," he stopped, started again, "is this?" "Eat your dinner," Eva said. He ate his dinner. At the head of the table, the Duke was looking at the letter in his hand, and his face was very still, and Celeste was talking and he was not answering, and the candles were burning down, and somewhere in the house the clock was ticking toward the end of the evening, the end of the second day, and Eva sat beside Fennec and drank her wine and did not look at anyone at the other end of the table. Not yet. The house was quiet by 11. Not the comfortable quiet of a household settling into sleep, the tighter, more careful quiet of a house in which something was happening in one room and everyone else had decided, collectively and without discussion, to be somewhere else. Eva heard it as she walked back from the library, the quality of the silence in the corridors, the way the footmen had found reasons to be on the upper floors, the way the drawing room had emptied itself with unusual efficiency after dinner. Everyone knew. Not the specifics, perhaps, but the shape of it. The letter, the Duke's voice calling for Hargrove, Celeste's face at the table after the kind of face that a very composed person makes when something has gone wrong that they cannot yet fix and they are deciding rapidly what to do about it. These things traveled through a household the way weather traveled through a valley, not as information, but as atmosphere. You felt it before you knew it. Eva went to her room. She did not undress. She sat in the chair beside the window with the lamp turned low and the ledger on the table beside her. Hargrove had returned it that afternoon with 3 additional pages she had not seen before, pages that extended the correspondence record forward to the previous week, and she looked at the dark grounds and thought. She thought about the Duke's face when he read the letter. She had not seen it directly, she had been watching Fennec, but she had seen enough. The stillness of it. The particular quality of a man becoming very careful very quickly, the way you become careful when something underneath you has shifted and you are not yet certain how much. She thought about what the letter contained. She did not know precisely, but Ashby's seal, Hargrove's log, and the accumulated patience of 11 months of careful record-keeping together suggested that whatever the Duke had read at his own dinner table had been sufficient. Sufficient, perhaps, but not complete. She had learned from her father and from her own considerable experience of rooms full of people who had arranged things without her knowledge, that sufficient was not the same as understood. A man could see evidence and still not see clearly, still look for the explanation that hurt least, still find the angle from which things appeared differently, still want, badly enough to make it matter, to be wrong about what he had seen. She picked up the ledger, set it down again. It was 11:30 when she heard the footsteps in the corridor. Not the efficient, purposeful footsteps of a servant on an errand, slower, less certain, the footsteps of someone who had started walking before they had entirely decided where they were going. They stopped outside her door. A pause, long enough that Eva set down the ledger and turned toward the door. The knock came, quiet, not imperious, not the knock of a duke accustomed to doors opening at his approach. The knock of a man who was not certain he had the right. Eva stood, crossed the room, opened the door. The Duke of Ashford was standing in the corridor in his evening clothes with his coat open and his cravat loosened, and the look of a man who had been sitting alone in a room for 2 hours, thinking very hard about something, and had arrived at the far end of it in worse condition than he started. He was holding the letter. He looked at her for a moment without speaking. "Miss Voss," he said. "Your Grace," she said. Another pause. He looked at the letter in his hand, then at her, then at some point past her shoulder, the way people look when they are assembling something they would rather not say but have decided to say anyway. "May I?" he began. "Yes," Eva said, and stepped back from the door. He did not sit. He stood near the window, the same window she had been sitting at, the dark grounds beyond it, the half-moon, with his hands at his sides and the letter still in one hand. And he was quiet for long enough that Eva, who had sat back down in the armchair and folded her hands in her lap, began to observe the specific texture of his discomfort with the careful attention she gave to most things. It was not the discomfort of a guilty man. It was not the discomfort of a man performing an apology because he had been told to. It was something more interior than that, the discomfort of a man in the process of revising something he had believed for a long time, which was its own particular kind of pain, distinct and not small. She had felt it herself once. She recognized it. "I read the letter," he said finally. "I assumed," she said. "It was from Ashby." He looked at the window. He believed, apparently, that the northern pastures had been, that we had reached an understanding about the transfer. A pause. He was writing to confirm the terms, that we had agreed on. Eva said nothing. "I had not agreed on anything," the Duke said. "I had not spoken with Ashby since the spring of last year, when I refused him." He turned the letter over in his hand. He seemed surprised in the letter that I had not confirmed. He seemed to believe that there had been ongoing communication, that an arrangement was underway. He stopped. The silence had a different quality now, not the waiting silence of before, but the after quality of a sentence that had finished and left something in the room. "I spoke with Hargrove," the Duke said, quietly. "For some time." Eva waited. "He showed me his log." A pause. "He has been keeping it since February of last year." Another pause, longer. "I was not aware that he was keeping it." "I know," Eva said. The Duke looked at her sharply. "You knew about the log." "Hargrove showed it to me yesterday morning." Something moved across his face, not anger, she thought. Something more complicated than anger. The particular expression of a man understanding, in a new way, the dimensions of something he had been living inside without knowing its shape. "How long," he said carefully, "have you?" "I arrived 2 days ago," Eva said. "I knew nothing before I arrived." "But since?" "Since the entrance hall," she said. "Yes." He was quiet. "The coat," he said. "The coat," she said. He turned back to the window. She watched his shoulders, the set of them, the tension running through them, the effort of a man holding himself very correctly in a situation that he could not hold correctly enough to make it feel right. "I owe you an apology," he said. "I began one in the library. I should not have allowed anything to interrupt it." "You did not know you were being interrupted," Eva said. That is not, he stopped, started again. That is not an excuse. I should have seen, earlier, many things I should have. He pressed his lips together. The coat, the chair at dinner, the way you were, I did not even see you arrive. I was told you were. He stopped again. He did not finish the sentence. Eva thought he probably could not finish it without saying what he had been told, and she thought he was not ready yet to say that out loud. Miss Voss, he said, I am deeply sorry for the coat, for the chair, for every, he paused, and she heard the weight he was putting on the next word, the effort of making it carry everything he meant by it, for every evening and every letter and every impression that I allowed to, that I did not question, that I should have questioned. I am sorry. Eva looked at him. He was facing the window, not her. She could see his reflection in the dark glass, imprecise, shadowed, the reflection of a man who had spent the last 2 hours dismantling something and had not yet decided what to build in its place. She thought about what she wanted to say. She had imagined versions of this, not obsessively, not dramatically, but in the idle, preparatory way she imagined most things, in the back of her mind while she was doing other things. She had imagined saying something precise and final that closed the matter cleanly and left no room for misunderstanding. She had imagined saying nothing at all. She had imagined the particular satisfaction of letting him stand in his own discomfort without offering him anything to hold on to. What she found, sitting in the armchair with the low lamp and the dark window and the Duchess's ledger on the table beside her, was that none of those versions felt accurate. You handed me your coat, Your Grace, she said. I held it, that is all. He turned. She met his eyes and held them, and she kept her expression exactly where it was, not cold, not warm, not forgiving, not accusing. Simply present. Simply herself in a chair in a room at 11:30, being looked at by a man who was finally looking. The silence stretched. That is not all, he said quietly. No, she said, it isn't. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked at the letter in his hand, and then at the window, and then at the floor, and Eva watched him do this, the movement of his attention, the way it kept returning and not finding a place to settle, and she thought that he was not a stupid man. He had never been a stupid man. He was a man who had trusted the wrong person and had been systematically relieved of the information he would have needed to know it, and that was a different thing entirely. It did not excuse it, but it was a different thing. What will you do, he asked, tomorrow? Leave, she said. He looked up. I told Lady Celeste this afternoon, Eva said, that I would be leaving in the morning. I told her not to trouble you about it. A pause. She didn't mention it, he said. No, Eva said, I didn't think she would. He was quiet for a moment, turning this over. The drainage easements, he said then, and his voice had shifted, more careful, more deliberate, as though he were moving into safer ground to recover himself. Hargrove mentioned that you and he had discussed the southern boundary. We did. I should like to address it properly before you leave. He paused. If you are willing. I am willing, Eva said. I am not certain I am staying. I understand. He nodded once slowly. I will not. I have no right to ask you to stay. I only. He stopped. When he started again, his voice was quieter. I find that I would like the chance to be seen clearly, by someone who is. He stopped again. Eva waited. By someone who is not afraid of what they see, he finished. The room was very still. Eva looked at him for a long moment. The loosened cravat, the letter in his hand, the reflection in the dark window behind him, the expression of a man who had just said something true and was not entirely certain how it had come out. She thought about the coat, the chair, the 3 days she had promised the Duchess. She thought about Hargrove's log and Fenwick's careful silence and the Duchess watching from the gallery with the expression of a woman who had been waiting for a very long time. She thought about the East Wing, closed for 11 years. She thought, nobody says. I'll stay for breakfast, she said. It was not much. But she watched something in his face shift, very small, very quiet, the way light changes in a room when a cloud moves, and she thought that perhaps, for tonight, it was enough. He straightened, looked at the letter one last time. Then he set it on the table beside the ledger, and Eva thought this was either unconscious or deliberate and could not decide which, and thought it did not matter. "Good night, Miss Voss," he said. "Good night, Your Grace," she said. He left. The door closed. Eva sat for a moment in the quiet room. Then she looked at the letter lying beside the ledger, Ashby's cramped handwriting, the broken seal, and she thought about a man who had walked down a corridor at past 11, not entirely certain where he was going, and had knocked anyway. She reached over and turned the lamp slightly higher. Then she picked up the ledger and she began, methodically, to read. She was in the breakfast room at 7. Not 8, not 7:30, which was early enough that the fire had only just been lit, and the morning light was still the thin, provisional kind that hadn't yet decided whether to commit. A housemaid looked up from the grate with undisguised surprise when Eva walked in, recovered herself, and disappeared. Eva poured her own tea from the pot on the sideboard and sat down and looked at the grounds through the tall windows. The fog was gone. The morning was clear and cold and very still, the kind of still that felt deliberate, as though the day were holding its breath, waiting to see what would be asked of it. The gardens lay sharp and precise in the early light, every hedge trimmed, every path raked, the whole of it exactly as it had been designed to appear, orderly, controlled, permanent. Eva drank her tea and thought about permanence. She had been up since 5. Not from sleeplessness. She had slept, briefly, with the focused efficiency she brought to most physical necessities, but from the particular restlessness of a mind that had finished processing something and wanted to move. She had read the ledger through to the end. She had sat with it for a while after. Then she had dressed and come downstairs and poured her tea and was now, at 7 in the morning, in a breakfast room in a house she had not intended to stay in, attempting to locate with precision what she actually intended to do. The problem was that she knew. She had known since approximately 11:30 the previous evening, since the Duke had stood at her window with a loosened cravat and said, "Someone who is not afraid of what they see," with the specific, slightly inconvenient clarity of a person who has been honest with themselves for long enough that self-deception has become difficult. She was not indifferent to him. She had told herself in February, when she first began to understand the shape of the Whitmore acquisition and what it implied about Ashford's position, that this was a business matter. She had told herself in March and April, when her solicitor began to sketch the fuller picture, that the Duke of Ashford was simply a piece of a larger arrangement, a name in a document, a consequence of decisions made above both their heads. She had told herself, arriving at the manor 2 days ago, that she had no interest in the man, only in the land. She was, evidently, a less reliable narrator of her own interior than she had believed. She set down her tea. Through the window, she watched a groundskeeper appear at the far end of the garden, moving along one of the paths with a barrow, unhurried, familiar with his ground. She watched him until he disappeared behind the hedgerow. The question was not whether she felt something. The question was what it was worth, and to whom, and whether a man who had handed her a coat in a hallway without looking was capable of becoming a man who looked. She thought he was. This was not sentiment. It was observation. The same observation she applied to drainage easements and land portfolios and letters with interesting seals. She had watched him for 2 days. She had watched the quality of his attention when it was not being managed, the way he had listened to Hargrove with the flat, careful focus of a man absorbing something painful without flinching, the way he had said, "I should have questioned," without qualifying it, without explaining it away, without offering her the softer version that would have been easier for both of them. He was capable. Whether he was willing was a different question, and whether she was willing, whether she wanted to invest herself in the long, uncertain work of building something with a man who was starting from a considerable deficit, was a question she had been circling since 5 in the morning and had not yet answered. She was still circling it when the door opened. It was not the Duke. It was the Duchess in a dark gray morning dress, carrying her own cup, who came in, looked at Eva sitting alone at the long table in the early morning light and said, "Good, you're still here." "I said I would stay for breakfast," Eva said. "You said you would stay for breakfast." The Duchess sat down, not at the far end, but 2 chairs away, close enough for conversation, far enough for privacy. She poured her tea with the efficiency of a woman who had been pouring her own tea for decades and had strong opinions about how it should be done. That was somewhat less than I hoped for. "I know," Eva said, "but more than I expected." The Duchess wrapped both hands around her cup and looked at Eva steadily. "He came to find you last night." "Yes." And Eva looked at her tea. "He apologized," she said. "I know, I heard him leave." The Duchess paused. "What did you say?" Eva considered this. "I told him I would stay for breakfast." The Duchess made a sound, small, dry, not quite a laugh. "You are very hard on him." "I am honest with him," Eva said, "which is, I think, what he needs rather more than softness." The Duchess was quiet for a moment. Outside, the groundskeeper reappeared on a different path, still unhurried, still familiar. "His father," the Duchess said, "was a man who trusted easily, too easily. It cost him considerably. James watched that." She paused. "He made himself careful for years, very careful, and then he was not careful enough, and here we are." She looked at Eva. "He is not a man who will trust again quickly. When he does—" "I know," Eva said. "Do you?" Eva looked at her. "I am not making a decision about his future, Your Grace. I am making a decision about my own." The Duchess held her gaze. Then slowly she nodded, once, the same nod as across the dinner table, the same quality of a measurement confirmed. "He is in the East Wing," the Duchess said. Eva went very still. "He goes there sometimes," the Duchess said in a different voice, quieter, older. "When he needs to think. He has done so since he was a boy. It was his father's library, the East Wing. They closed it after." She paused. "After his father died. 11 years. Eva set down her cup. Nobody says Fenwick had told her, or rather nobody says. "Why?" she asked. The Duchess looked at the window for a long moment. "His father's last letter to him," she said quietly, "was found in that library. After James had been away, he did not come back in time." She paused. "He has never told anyone what the letter said. He went in once the week after the funeral and he has not been back since." She looked at Eva. "Until this morning." The room was very still. Eva thought about a boy who had learned to be careful. A man who had been made careless by someone patient and calculating enough to dismantle his carefulness one small piece at a time. And now a morning, cold and clear and deliberate, and a door that had been closed for 11 years. She stood. The Duchess said nothing. Eva set her napkin on the table, pushed in her chair, and walked out of the breakfast room. The East Wing was at the end of the long corridor on the ground floor, behind a door that looked exactly like the other doors except that the handle was slightly stiffer, the way handles get when they have not been turned in a long time. Eva put her hand on it, felt the resistance, applied even, steady pressure until it gave. The corridor beyond was cold and dim, the curtains still drawn on the windows, the air carrying the particular quality of a closed room, not stale exactly, but compressed, as though it had been holding itself together for a long time and had not yet decided whether to let go. She walked down it quietly. The library was the third door, also closed. She could see light beneath it, a fire lit, which meant someone had been in before her, which meant the Duke had not simply walked in on impulse. He had arranged this, or asked for it to be arranged, which was its own kind of telling. She knocked. A pause. "Come in," he said. The room was smaller than the main library. Older feeling, not because it was older, but because it had been left, and things that are left take on a particular quality of time that other things do not. Books on every wall, a desk by the window, two armchairs by a fire that was new and bright and somewhat incongruous with the stillness of everything around it. The curtains on the east window had been opened. Morning light lay across the floorboards in long, precise rectangles. The Duke was standing at the desk with his back to her. He turned when she came in. He looked, she thought, like a man who had been awake for most of the night and had not eaten breakfast and had been standing in a cold room that he had not entered in 11 years and was not entirely certain what he was doing there. He looked, in other words, considerably more human than he had at any point since she arrived. She stood just inside the door and looked at the room. "The East Wing," she said. "The East Wing," he said. "Nobody says." Something moved across his face, surprise, she thought, that she knew, and then something past the surprise that was more complicated. "My mother told you." "This morning, yes." He looked at the desk. On it she could see now there was a letter not folded, not in an envelope, lying flat and open with the handwriting facing up. Old paper, slightly yellowed. The ink faded to brown at the edges. She did not look at it directly. "I came in here this morning," he said, "and I found it exactly where I left it." He paused. 11 years, and it was exactly where I left it. Another pause. "I'm not certain what I expected." Eva said nothing. "He wrote," the Duke said, "that he had made a great number of mistakes with the estate, with people he should have trusted more carefully and people he trusted who did not merit it." He stopped. "He wrote that he hoped I would learn to tell the difference." A pause, longer, earlier than he had. The fire crackled. Outside, somewhere in the grounds, the groundskeeper was moving along another path. "I have been standing here this morning," the Duke said, "thinking that I have not learned it, that I have done exactly what he stopped, pressed his lips together, that I have made precisely the same mistakes he wrote to warn me about." "You've learned it now," Eva said. He looked at her. "Imperfectly," she said, "late, not without assistance." She paused. "But you have learned it." He held her gaze for a moment, then he looked at the letter on the desk. "Miss Voss," he said. "Eva." He said her name as though testing the weight of it, whether it was a thing he was allowed to use. There is a great deal I should like to say to you, a great deal I should like to begin. I'm aware that I have given you no reason whatsoever to." He stopped, started again more carefully. "I am not asking you to overlook what has happened. I am not asking you to pretend the entrance hall was other than it was, or the dinner, or any of it." He paused. I am asking whether you would be willing to." He stopped. Eva watched him stand there with the letter on the desk behind him, and the morning light coming through the east window, and the fire doing its best with the cold. And she watched him search for the end of his own sentence and not find it. And she thought that this was, in its way, more honest than anything he could have said. "Walk with me," she said. He blinked. "In the grounds," she said. "This morning, before the other guests are up." She paused. "You can say what you want to say while we walk. I find people say things better when they are moving." He looked at her for a long moment. Then something in him shifted, not dramatically, not loudly. Quietly. The way a door opens when the right amount of pressure is applied, not forced, simply moved. "Yes," he said. "Finish your letter first," Eva said. She turned and walked back into the corridor, pulling the door almost shut behind her, not closed, just nearly, giving him the privacy of a room without the privacy of a sealed door. She stood in the cold corridor with her hands folded and looked at the old curtains and the compressed, held-together air, and she thought about a boy who learned to be careful and a man who forgot and a morning that was clear and still and waiting to see what would be asked of it. She thought, "I will not make this easy for him." And then, very quietly, almost without permission, "But I will not make it impossible either." They walked for an hour. He talked for most of it, not fluently, not with the ease of a man accustomed to being listened to, but with the halting, effortful honesty of someone who was not used to saying true things out loud and was learning the shape of it as he went. He told her about Celeste, the sequence of it, the small adjustments he had not questioned because he had not known to question them. He told her about the northern pastures and the correspondence he had never received and the version of Eva Voss that had been built for him, incrementally, out of omissions and shadings and the occasional well-placed word. He said, "I was told you were unremarkable, and then, looking at the path ahead, I cannot account for the fact that I believed it." Eva said, "She is very good at what she does." He said, "That is generous of you," she said. "It is accurate. Generosity has nothing to do with it." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "You are not what I expected." "I know," she said. "I never am." They walked past the kitchen garden, past the formal hedgerow, past the groundskeeper, who touched his hat without looking up, with the practiced discretion of a man who had worked for this family for a long time and knew which mornings required invisibility. Near the far end of the grounds, where the park gave way to open fields and the house was visible behind them as a whole complete thing, all of it, the closed east wing and the blue drawing room and the entrance hall and the grand staircase and every room in which something had happened over the past 2 days, the Duke stopped walking. Eva stopped beside him. He was looking at the house. "I owe you more than an apology," he said. "I am aware of that." "Yes," she said. "I don't know," he said carefully, "what you want. I don't know what I have no right to assume, after everything." He paused. "I only know what I want, and I find I am not willing to be careful about saying it." Eva looked at the house. She thought about the coat. She had been thinking about the coat for 2 days, not with anger, or not only with anger, but with the particular attention she gave to things that told her something true. A man who doesn't look. A woman who holds what she is given and says nothing and waits. She thought about how long she had been waiting. Not for him specifically, she had not known him specifically, had not thought about him specifically, but for the thing itself, the possibility of it, the specific future in which she handed things back instead of holding them. She turned to look at him. He was already looking at her. "I am not easy," she said. "I know," he said. "I have the Whitmore holdings and the Eastern parcels and a solicitor in London, who is very good at his job, and a father who taught me never to make a decision I couldn't afford." "I know," he said. "I do not require saving. I do not require managing. I do not require," she paused, "anyone to hold my coat." Something moved across his face, the ghost of something, almost a smile gone before it arrived. "I know," he said. I am aware that the coat was, I know." Eva looked at him for a long moment. Then she said, "Ask me properly." He blinked. "Not now," she said. "Not this morning, not in a field, not after 2 days." She looked back at the house. "I am going to go back to London. I am going to see my solicitor about the drainage easements. I am going to spend 3 weeks doing the things I intended to do before I was invited to your dinner." She paused. "And then, if you wish to, you may write to me, properly, without anyone managing the correspondence." He was quiet. "And then," she said, "we will see." She looked at him, he looked back. "We will see," he said. It was not much, but she heard what was underneath it, not relief, not victory, but something steadier than both. Something that had the quality of a beginning rather than an end. Something that would need time and correspondence and a great deal of honesty, and probably several more conversations in cold corridors and early mornings and fields at the edge of parks. Something that was not yet anything, but that was not nothing either. "Come," Eva said, "breakfast will be ready." She turned toward the house and began walking. After a moment, she heard his footsteps beside her. They walked back in silence, the comfortable kind which was new, which had not been available to them before this morning, and the house grew larger as they approached it, filling in its details, becoming specific again after the distance of the fields. The east wing with its opened curtains. The entrance hall beyond the front door. Eva looked at the front door as they reached the gravel drive. Then she looked at the Duke. He looked back at her and she saw him understand, saw the moment it arrived, the quiet recognition of it. He opened the front door and held it, for her. 6 weeks later, the first letter arrived. It came on a Tuesday, with the Morning Post, in an envelope addressed in a hand that was careful without being formal, the handwriting of someone who had thought about what they were doing before they did it. Eva's solicitor was in the chair across from her desk when it arrived. He saw her look at the seal. He gathered his papers with the practiced efficiency of a man who understood when a meeting had concluded, said good morning, and let himself out. Eva opened the letter. It was 3 pages. She read it twice, once quickly, once slowly, the way she read things that mattered. Then she set it on the desk beside the Whitmore ledgers and the drainage easement files and the accumulated careful architecture of her working life, and she looked at it for a moment. Then she took out a clean sheet of paper. She wrote for 20 minutes. Not a long letter, she was not by nature a long letter writer, but precise, honest. The kind of letter that said exactly what it meant without requiring the reader to look for it. She signed it, folded it, sealed it, wrote his name on the front. The letters continued for 4 weeks. Then they stopped because there was no longer any need for them. The dinner was held in the first week of December, smaller than the one in which it had all begun, only 14 guests. The rooms lit with the amber candlelight that turned everything warm and imprecise. Eva arrived early, not because her solicitor suggested it, because she wanted to. Hargrove met her at the door. "Miss Voss," he said, with the precise correctness that she had come to understand was his particular form of warmth. "Mr. Hargrove," she said, "is everything in order?" "Everything," he said, "is in order." She handed him her coat. He took it without expression, though she thought, she was nearly certain, that something moved briefly behind his eyes. The satisfaction of a man who had been keeping a very careful log for a very long time and had arrived at the final entry. She walked into the entrance hall. It was already full, the sound of it, the warmth of it, the complicated human noise of people gathered in a house where things had been resolved. Fenwick was near the fireplace, talking to a young woman who appeared to find him considerably more interesting than anyone at the previous dinner had. The Duchess was by the staircase, small and white-haired, and watching everything with the expression of a woman who had arranged a great deal of this, and was satisfied with how it had turned out. She met Eva's eyes across the room. Eva gave her the nod. The Duchess smiled. And then the Duke was there, not from across the room, not from a distance, simply there beside her, having come through the crowd with the quiet directness of a man who knew where he was going. "You're early," he said. "I am precisely on time," she said. "I said 1:30. "You said the evening began at 7. It is 7. She looked at him. "If you wanted me at 1:30, you should have written 1:30. "I'll remember that," he said. "You should," she said. He looked at her for a moment, the long, unguarded look that had taken him most of October to learn and that he was now, she thought, quite good at. Then he offered her his arm. She took it. They walked into the dining room together, through the noise and the candlelight, and Eva looked at the long table with its 16 place settings and its careful copperplate place cards, and the chair at the Duke's right hand that had her name on it, written in Hargrove's hand, precise and deliberate and exactly where it had always belonged. She sat down. The Duke sat beside her. Across the table, Fenwick caught her eye and looked away very quickly with the expression of a man attempting, unsuccessfully, not to look pleased with himself. The first course arrived. The evening began. Thank you for listening to the story all the way to the end. Please tell us which city you're watching from and what the story made you feel. Don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss new stories.